Ever since I can remember, I always felt like I was the extra piece in my family, the one that didn't quite fit the picture. My sister Julia, she was the golden girl. My father looked at her like she was a miracle on two legs. Every clumsy drawing she made was a masterpiece. Every bad grade came with an excuse. Every birthday was an event. When she was 5, he framed one of her scribbles and hung it in his office. When I brought home a first place science fair trophy at the same age, he glanced at it and said, "Don't let it get to your head." It wasn't just what he gave her, it was the way he saw her, the way he chose to see her, the way he showed up to every single one of her school plays, even when she was just a tree in the background, clapping like she was the star. And when I got my lead role in the school's final drama production, he skipped it because he'd had a long day at work. There was no big blowout, no tragic event that broke us apart. It was quieter than that, more painful. It was the silence, the absence, the indifference, drop by drop, year after year. While Julia was Daddy's princess, I was just there. Always trying not to take up space. At 9, she got a shiny pink bike with her name custom painted on it. I got her old scooter with a torn rubber handle and a wheel that wobbled. At 15, she had the kind of birthday party people post on Pinterest boards, fairy lights, gourmet cupcakes, a private DJ. I had my mom, a store-bought cake, and a plastic table in the backyard. Not that I blame my mom. She did what she could. But my dad? He said birthdays were just commercial nonsense. Julia wasn't cruel, not intentionally. In fact, I think part of her believed we were treated the same. But how could she know any different? She grew up in sunlight. I grew in shadow. Then came college. The true test. Julia barely scraped through high school, but still got accepted into a private university with a monthly tuition that could have paid rent for 2 families. Dad was over the moon. Said she deserved the best education money could buy. Bought her a car so she wouldn't have to take the bus. Gave her a credit card. Paid for a 3-week trip to Paris before classes even started, and me. I studied. Like my life depended on it, because it did. I got into a top public university on merit, one of the hardest to get into. No tuition fees, but the expenses still added up. Transport, books, food. I worked part-time at a cafe, gave tutoring, lessons at night, and sold homemade brownies on weekends. Sometimes I'd come home exhausted, with flour still on my jeans and the sound of espresso machines echoing in my ears. I never asked my father for anything. Not because I didn't need it, but because I already knew the answer. Still one day, I gathered the courage. It was the final semester of my course. The graduation ceremony was coming up. I had fought so hard for that moment, sleepless nights, panic attacks, working double shifts while writing essays. All I wanted was to walk across that stage, in front of my mother, in front of the world, and feel, for just one day, like I mattered. I asked him if he could help pay the graduation fee, just a small contribution. I didn't even expect the full amount. He didn't even look up from his phone. Graduation? For what? To wear a silly hat and wave a piece of paper? That's not an achievement. That's expected. I'm not wasting money on this nonsense. Then he chuckled, like I was some naive little girl playing pretend. That laugh hit me harder than any slap ever could. I didn't cry in front of him. I nodded, stood up, and left the room. But that night, in the bathroom with the shower, running to drown out the sound, I broke down, and then I got quiet. Not the sad kind of quiet, the kind that comes before a storm. Something inside me snapped, not in a destructive way, but in a decisive one. If he didn't want to see me, I'd make sure he couldn't look anywhere without seeing me. I stopped asking, stopped waiting. I focused on building myself piece by piece in silence. I started freelancing, found opportunities online even, launched a small digital project that at the time seemed insignificant. I poured into it every ounce of pain, rejection, and fire I had buried inside Dot. He thought ignoring me would make me disappear, but all he did was give me the fuel I needed to rise. He didn't know what was coming. Dot. No one did. Asterisk I. Didn't attend the graduation ceremony. Dot. Not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to let him see even a flicker of what I was working on behind the curtain. Everyone expected me to show up in cap and gown. Some classmates asked why. I wasn't there, and I just said I had other plans. What I didn't tell them was that while they were walking across a stage for applause, I was building an empire from the ground up. No lights, no congratulations, no speeches. Just quiet, strategic, relentless work. After that conversation with my father, after the way he dismissed my graduation like it was a joke, something inside me realigned. For years, I had been running on survival, unproving myself to people who didn't care to see me. Now I was running on something else entirely, rage with purpose. I spent the next few months isolating myself from almost everything. I worked 3 jobs at once. I accepted every freelance gig I could find, translating, editing, ghostwriting, even designing basic websites with the little HTML I had learned from YouTube. Most people in my position would have burned out. And I almost did. But every time I felt like I couldn't take it anymore, I remembered his laugh, that arrogant smirk of someone who never thought I'd become anything more than a footnote to my sister's spotlight, and that alone kept me going. I stopped visiting home regularly. My mom would message me asking if I was okay, and I'd always answer with short, polite replies. She knew I was hurting, but I didn't want pity. I wanted distance, space to become someone else entirely, and during that space, something incredible happened at the side project I'd launched during university, a tiny online platform to help students from low-income families access scholarships, grants, and mentorship. Started to grow. At first. It was just a few students, mostly people I knew, but word spread. I started sharing success stories on social media. Students began posting about how they got into college because of our resources. Then a blogger picked it up. Then a local journalist. Then someone from a national education podcast asked to interview me. I said no. I wasn't ready, not yet. The spotlight was a tool, and I didn't want to step into it until I was prepared to control it. I reinvested everything I earned into improving the platform. I hired 2 interns, both from underprivileged backgrounds like mine. I started building partnerships with NGOs. Slowly, silently, I was creating something powerful. Meanwhile, Julia was still the family's pride. She posted filtered pictures from beach resorts with captions like, "Grateful for Daddy's love." She got internships handed to her through my dad's network. She lived in an apartment he paid for and complained on Instagram about how exhausting corporate life was. She didn't know I was watching, and he didn't know. I was climbing at a family dinner, the first one I attended in nearly a year. I walked in late as they were toasting to Julia's promotion at her internship. My father looked me over like I was some ghost who'd accidentally wandered in. He barely acknowledged me. Then, halfway through the meal, I mentioned casually that I was flying to Sao Paulo for a meeting with a potential investor. He laughed again. Not the same mocking laugh, but one laced with disbelief. "What kind of investor?" he asked, swirling his wine glass. "You selling brownies again?" The table chuckled. I smiled. Calm, cold. "Actually," I said, "a startup accelerator. They're interested in expanding my platform nationally." Silence. My mother looked at me with cautious pride. Julia blinked like she wasn't sure if she misheard. My father narrowed his eyes. What platform? I took a sip of water and said, without blinking, "You'll find out soon enough." It wasn't arrogance, it was protection. I had learned not to hand over anything of value to people who once stomped on my smallest victories. That week, the meeting in Snow Hollow happened, and it changed everything. The investors loved the model, a social impact startup with proof of traction, a growing user base, and the potential to change thousands of lives. They offered funding, not millions, not yet, but enough. Enough to hire a real team, rebrand the platform, expand into other countries in Latin America. I cried on the flight home, not because of the money, but because for the first time I felt seen, not by my father, not by Julia, but by the world, by people who believed in what I built. 6 months later, we launched the new version of the platform. We went viral. News outlets picked up the story. My inbox flooded. Schools started inviting me to speak. I still wasn't comfortable on stage, but I said yes, because every girl sitting in a silent house, wondering why her parents never clapped for her, needed to hear me say, "You don't have to be their favorite to become unforgettable." And just like that, my name started spreading, without needing his approval, without needing Julia's spotlight. I was carving my own path in a language only the brave could speak: resilience. One afternoon, as I was prepping for a TEDx talk, something I once thought only special people did, I got a message from him, just 2 words: "I'm impressed." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I had learned something far more powerful than revenge: silence. When you've already said everything through action is deafening, but this was just the beginning. The days after I met Julia again were strange, not dramatic, not explosive, just strange, like someone had tilted the frame of my life a few degrees and nothing sat quite right anymore. We started talking, carefully, hesitantly. She sent voice notes. I replied with text. There was no apology big enough to undo the years, and we both knew that. But there was a crack in the wall now. And through it, something human began to pass. She told me the truth. After all the filters, trips, fancy dinners, and company cocktail parties, she was exhausted, burned out, empty. She'd spent her 20s performing the role of the golden girl, doing what Dad expected, chasing careers she didn't love, pretending to thrive under pressure that never really came from inside her. The job she lost had been a mercy, she admitted, but it also left her hollow, and me. By then, I was already in a different orbit. The startup had grown. We expanded to 5 countries. We signed a partnership with a major global education platform. I was listed in a 30 under 30 list I didn't even know I'd been nominated for. A documentary crew started following me for a feature about women breaking cycles, and the more visible I became, the more my name popped up in rooms I had once never dared enter. But visibility came with shadows for every young girl who saw me. As a role model, there were men in meetings who called me emotional for raising valid concerns. There were internet trolls who questioned my qualifications, saying I was just lucky or just bitter. And sometimes, even when I stood in front of a packed auditorium filled with applause, I'd still feel the presence of that old wound, the voice in my head that still whispered, "He never clapped for you." I started therapy, something I should have done long ago. And there, for the first time, I said out loud, "I don't want revenge anymore. I just want peace." And my therapist looked at me and said, "Then stop trying to win the war." That sentence broke me, because I realized that's what I'd been doing. My success, as proud as I was at it, had also become armor. Everything I achieved, I carried like a sword, as if I had to defend my worth at every turn. But maybe I didn't need to prove I was better than them anymore. Maybe I could just be. Around that time, Julia asked to meet again, but not just with me. She wanted to talk to our father. I hesitated. I hadn't seen him since that day. He stood in my doorway, looking like a man drowning in pride. Part of me wanted to refuse, to stay above it. But another part, the one who had already started to heal, was curious. We met in the old house, the one we grew up in, the one where I used to tiptoe around just to avoid his size of disappointment. It looked smaller now, faded. He sat at the table like he didn't quite know how to sit still. Julia began. She spoke calmly but clearly. She told him how he had failed both of us in different ways, how he had given her love laced with pressure, and me. Silence. And then she said something I never expected. We both spent our lives trying to earn something that should have been given freely. He didn't interrupt. He didn't get defensive. He just cried, not loudly, not performatively. Quiet, ashamed tears that slipped down the face of a man who had finally seen the damage in full color. And for the first time in my life, I watched my father shrink into something human. I don't know how to fix it, he said. You can't, I replied. But you can start by never pretending again. Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was clean. That night, I stayed at the house, not because I wanted to return to the past, but because something in me wanted to stand in the place I was once small, as the woman I had become. I walked into my childhood room, still painted a pale lavender. My old trophies were gone, my posters taken down. But there, in the corner, was a shelf. And on that shelf, tucked behind a stack of old books, was a dusty photo. It was me, age 7, holding a medal from a school spelling bee, smiling like the world had just cracked open for me. I stared at that photo for a long time. That girl, she had no idea what was coming. The rejection, the tears, the loneliness, the hunger. But she also had no idea that one day she would become a storm. 2 months later, something happened that neither I nor my father could have ever expected. Was invited to speak at an international summit on education and equity. It was hosted by a major global organization, streamed worldwide, attended by leaders, presidents, investors. I was the closing keynote speaker. They asked me to invite someone who had impacted my educational journey. I paused. My mind ran through names, teachers, mentors, friends, but deep down, I knew exactly who that person was, not because he had lifted me, but because he had forced me to climb with no rope. So I did the unthinkable. I sent my father an invitation. No message, just the digital pass, seat, front row. He didn't reply, not for days. But on the morning of the event, when I walked onto that massive, glowing stage in front of thousands, he was there, sitting beside Julia, and when I spoke, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I stood tall, and I said, some of us grow with applause, some of us grow in silence, but those of us who bloom in the dark are the ones who learn how to light the way for others. The audience rose. And in the front row, for the first time in my life, I saw my father stand and clap. Not for who I had become despite him, but for who I had always been. And for once, that was enough. Asterisk years passed, not quickly, not in a blur, but slowly, beautifully, like a garden finally allowed to breathe after a long, brutal winter. My platform became a movement. What started as a one-page website helping students access scholarships turned into a global initiative. Governments adopted our model. Thousands of first-generation students graduated because of what we built. Some of them called me a pioneer. Others called me a miracle. I didn't feel like either. I just felt like a girl who had learned how to alchemize pain into purpose, but something had changed in me. Success no longer felt like survival. It felt like freedom. The kind of freedom that allows you to create, rest, and exist without constantly looking over your shoulder for validation. I didn't need to scream anymore to be heard. I didn't need to win every room to prove I belonged. I had made peace with the fact that I would never get a childhood do-over, that there would always be that ache, that quiet wondering of what it might have felt like to grow up wanted. Chosen, protected, but I had stopped needing the past to explain the present. My story wasn't about what they didn't give me. It was about what I gave myself. My father and I never became close, but we spoke. We shared holidays again. He asked questions sometimes, carefully, unsure of the boundaries. He started showing up to events quietly in the back, never drawing attention. He listened more than he spoke. And every once in a while, I caught him looking at me with a face full of something he never knew how to say, regret and awe. He never said sorry, but his silence had shifted, and that, in some strange way, felt louder than words ever could. Julia and I grew close in a way we never had before, without competition, without expectations. She began working with the platform, helping students with emotional wellness and coaching. Her own experience of burnout became a powerful tool for others. She found purpose not in being daddy's favorite or chasing titles, but in being human again. We healed, slowly, with late-night phone calls, long hugs, and truths that had waited too long to be spoken. One day, while walking through a university campus where I was giving a talk, Julia turned to me and said, I used to think I had everything, but looking back, you were the one who had the real inheritance. You got the strength. I didn't know what to say, so I just squeezed her hand. Years later, my father got sick. It wasn't dramatic. No movie scene with a hospital bed and oxygen tubes. It was slower cancer, the kind that wears a man down piece by piece. He grew smaller. His hands shook. His voice weakened. I visited often, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't always come with clarity or closure. Sometimes it just grows inside you like moss, soft, green, quiet. And one day, you realize you're breathing easier. Near the end, in a rare moment of softness, he looked at me and said, "You did it, You became everything I didn't know how to dream for you." That night, I cried, not for him, for the girl I used to be, the one who used to wonder why her dad never clapped, never looked, never stayed. And now, he was watching her always. After he passed, I didn't speak at the funeral. I let Julia do that. She had more to say, more to grieve. I just stood back, quiet, remembering everything. And afterward, as people approached me with kind words and hushed condolences, I thought about the full circle we had come. The silence of that little girl had become a voice echoing through countries. The girl who wasn't seen had lit a path for others to be recognized. And the woman I had become, she was unapologetically alive. 1 year later, I returned to my childhood neighborhood. Streets were smaller. The playground swings creaked the same way. The bakery still sold the same guava pastries, and the house, the one I used to feel invisible in, was being sold. I stood outside for a long time, remembering it all. And then I smiled, because now that house no longer held me. I did. On the flight home, I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor of a blank document. For once, I wasn't preparing a pitch, a speech, or a proposal. I was writing my book. Title: The Daughter Who Wasn't Chosen. Subtitle: How I Built a Legacy Without Their Applause. And on the dedication page, I typed, "To the ones who were never clapped for. I see you, and I'm clapping now." Because in the end, the truth wasn't that I'd risen despite them. The truth was, I rose because I chose myself. And that choice, that was the loudest applause of all.